I'm headed to vote. I just left work.
That's good news.
Yeah.
I know I have to get mine in still. And when you're ready, Greg, you'll just. Welcome to today's curriculum committee meeting. It's virtual again on June 8th. We're here at 4:33. And in accordance with an act to implement provisions necessary to the health, welfare, and safety of the citizens of Maine in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency, as enacted to read Section G11 MRSA 403, of public proceedings through all public proceedings through remote access during declaration of state of emergency to COVID-19 and for 30 days following the termination of that state of emergency, the curriculum committee meeting will be held through Google Meet and will be live streamed and available for viewing at www.msad11.org. And so welcome. We have Nancy Fortier-Brown, Matthew Marshall, Nicole Medor, and technology support from Greg Gorham. I'm going to be efficient today. Our first item on our agenda is recommendations and approval of social studies instructional materials at the middle school level. So I put this on our agenda because it's the last meeting of the year. And we've been working hard at the middle school. There's a team of teachers who've been working with me either weekly or bi-weekly for the last few months, mapping out the learning results, the updated social studies learning results by grade level. When we first started the process, it was like every grade level had 92 expectations. And that's not realistic. And so what we did is we spent a great deal of time really thinking through how can we prioritize and ensure deep learning in the content of social studies with an appropriate level of expectation, performance expectations per grade level. And that was a really robust conversation, and we came to some great clarity, and we have that all mapped out now for 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. It has resulted in us changing our scope and sequence, most notably at 6th grade, but also in 7th and 8th grade. And the biggest change in 6th grade is there was a brief kind of exposure to map skills and then a deep dive into the ancient studies across the whole year. And instead now we're doing an orientation to some mapping skills around geography and then diving into Maine studies. It's something that's actually been kind of lost in our middle school evolution over the last few years, and we needed to kind of tighten that back up and bring that back in explicitly into the curriculum. And it maps out well for us in 6th grade. And that's where a lot of our Native American studies will also be part of a significant portion of learning, and then we'll build off from that each year annually as is expected of us. But we wanted to make sure there was a nice foundation starting at the 6th grade level. And we will still continue with ancient studies. We've just refined that a little bit to make sure it was a diverse regions, and also to make sure that it would allow for yet again another foundation into the high school studies that follow. And we met with the high school team to get their feedback on that. So we're feeling pretty confident about that. And so our next step was moving forward in the instructional review process. We have been engaged in that pretty intensely. We also have a critical instructional review process tool that we've been using. That was a kind of, we gathered a couple national resources and developed one for us to ensure that we're not missing really key features in social studies materials, especially in this day and age. And so We are using that tool to review. We've some resources. Now, this is where it gets tricky. Normally, like in the ELA process, I would then come forward and say the team has recommended X or Y, and then you review and you adopt. We're not quite there yet, and I'd rather not wait until August to make a recommendation and decision and then have to purchase the materials and be prepared for the start of the school year. So what I'd like to do is share with you what our process is, and I'm happy to also, if you need to see the curriculum review tool, share that and see if, given where we're at, which is a much more narrow scope, you would be comfortable allowing us to move forward this summer in the purchasing of the materials. So in the middle school, they still would like to be able to have access to a textbook. And so that's really critical to use our review tool to make sure the textbooks are using primary and secondary sources, are referencing multiple perspectives of the situation rather than just a European perspective or some of our other perspectives that are less diverse, so that we can understand the situation really holistically and understand the decision-making factors and the impacts that led to that resulted from decisions across the standards, which would be like history, geography, economics, personal finance, civics, all of that. Okay, so and I'm comfortable with them using a textbooks as a resource. They would still design units of study that allow for debate, projects, exploration using multimedia sources. It would not be the sole resource available to staff to enable us to reach those performance expectations that we mapped out in the curriculum. The current textbook they have access to actually has expired completely. So there's no access at all. So it is really critical that we come up with something. And they are reviewing a McGraw-Hill series that's designed for 6th, 7th, and 8th. And they're reviewing a series called TCI, Alive, which is a little bit more contemporary, but grounded in all the best practices in social studies in terms of textbook development. Those are the two that we've narrowed it down to. We have samples of everything, including the online platform that we're using to critique the materials against the review guide. Additionally, in 6th grade, well, all grades, but especially 6th grade, we'd like to use something called Newsella, which we use already in our system, but there's a custom collection. We piloted the Native American collection that was developed, just its main study on Maine Native Americans. And while it was interesting, we felt like it needed a broader, it just needed more. And since then, Newsella has worked with Maine educators to actually develop a Maine studies collection that integrates the Native American history and perspectives and culture throughout. So they're now part of the Maine Studies collection rather than this isolated collection, which we feel much better about. And it does cross the standards in a more impactful way, we feel like. Again, it wouldn't be our only resource, but it would be a pretty strong, relevant resource that's also digitally accessible. So if, depending on the environment we're in next year, we can use that in-house, in person, but also access the digital resources if for any reason we're working remotely or students are not in the building or for homework. So we'd like to be able to continue just redirecting our local pilot funds into that particular custom collection. And we're going to be doing some further studying based on some materials that the Department of Education has outlined online in terms of Maine studies and Native American studies that are sort of freely accessible as we continue with our curriculum map, integrate those in. So we wouldn't need your permission on those because they're not budget related, but they'd certainly be supported by the Department of Education, so they've been vetted. So that's the kind of the long story of where we're at. We have set aside funds in the American Relief Act for social studies materials rather than having those in our local budget, which is where they usually reside. Like they go on like a 5-year cycle where we renew those social studies funds every 5 years. We actually extracted them from the local budget to really ensure that we had a lean budget for this year and put them into the relief funds. I think that's what we need to know. I'm trying to think through the process. So funds, what the resources are, what our process is. And it's a little unusual, not totally unorthodox, but to ask you to consider our team being able to select one of those resources, the Newsella plus one of those textbook resources as the purchased products. And we'll also have some supplemental primary and secondary resources to further support the curriculum, if that is acceptable.
Yeah, I really don't have any questions, Angela. I 110%, if there is such a thing. I'm confident that you all will move forward, and based on your recommendation, I think that I'm comfortable with, and the group's recommendation, I'm comfortable with doing whatever you ask of me anyway.
Thanks, Matt.
I would agree with Matt that I don't have any problem, sort of giving you and your team of teachers that sort of trust or authority, for lack of a better term, to make the best decision. Do you think you'll be able to make a decision and purchase before August, or is August some type of a deadline? Okay.
Well, I just know that the board tends to start and building their committee schedule and their meeting structures again in August. And so I felt like, I would have to wait until August until I got that kind of official word. I know the team and I are meeting tomorrow, in fact, tomorrow afternoon, to try to go through one more final round of reviews. And they were a little worried when they saw the agenda that said June 8th and we're meeting on June 9th. And I was like, well, I have an idea that I'm going to present, because I certainly don't want to make a decision without the input of the staff who will be teaching. And they have been really good about being committed to using their critical review tool as we go through these resources. So I do feel like there's a really nice balance of experience, perspective, and kind of parameters and standards for what's important in an investment like this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Angela, frankly, other than having access to the textbook to see exactly what's in it, as far as to what's being taught, I would probably defer to you and your team anyway. I don't really need to look at the book, either one of them. I'm assuming that each program, each one of them have a textbook. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there would be access at the it's like a there's 2 at 6th grade that come together and as like a pair. One is focused on geography skills and the impact on the human impact on the environment, but from a social studies perspective rather than science perspective, and then or social sciences. And then the other one that pairs with that is actually in ancient studies. The ancient studies material we're using right now, last year we needed more because in this remote environment we're in, everyone had to have their own copy. And we actually had to go on eBay to find stuff because they're like 20 years out of print. So we felt like, and they knew this review cycle was coming along. So I said, if we can hold off 1 year, we're gonna get what our students really deserve, and reasonably. We're pretty frugal, but reasonably.
Yeah.
And then 7th and 8th grade is kind of like this series across U.S. history across time, but not to the level that the high school gets at. And now the texts we're looking at are much more friendly in terms of reader accessibility, informational text features, digital access points, like multimedia and digital features. And there's some really neat teacher features that have been curated to really enable a more dynamic environment for students and teachers. So that's kind of exciting.
So you have my
I actually do.
support. The only thing that I would say, though, is that in the past, prior to you coming on, Angela, we've had programs that teachers haven't used, and we've put a lot of money into it. And so I see how you're doing things, and I trust that things will be different. Any material will be used. So you have my support.
Thanks, Nancy. And that's really an honest assessment. I'm really aware of that. That's an issue we had with our one of our ELA programs, the anthology that was purchased many years ago. And that is why I think it's so important to have teachers be like central to the review process, because they're the ones that need to be able to use it with the curriculum in mind. So I do appreciate you raising that, Nancy, and making sure that, we're all aware that there have been, in any district this happens, but there's been some historical practices that aren't always, don't always pan out as we wish they would. Matt, did you have a question?
Actually, no, I was going to make a statement, but it was probably a little too generic, so I'll just let it go.
Okay.
It was actually about a certain part of the curriculum that I was just kind of curious if. Nah, just skip it. Never mind.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm good.
Okay. Well, what I think might actually be helpful then, since you seem to be comfortable with this, is when the board schedule gets set for next school year, and this meeting gets established, this meeting time and date gets established, and hopefully I get you all back, but we'll see how that gets worked out. I will make sure this gets onto the agenda and we can do like a recap. This is the decision, this is the resource, here's the map, just so you can see all the pieces tied together. And kind of our professional, you'll see our professional learning plan anyway, because that's always on the agenda at the August or September meeting.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. The next one is just, it's awareness, but you do have opportunity to ask questions and influence my thinking. So there's a few steps to this. So the agenda item is the ESSA federal funding proposed use of funds for school year 21-22. So ESSA is part of our federal funding. In that is what we call titles, and every title represents a different area of funding. So Title I is literacy and math. And on our system, we use that at the intervention level, so supporting struggling learners. And we use those funds in the K-5 space. Title II is professional learning, leadership development, and class size reduction. Maybe more, but those are the areas we usually use. Mentoring. Title IV has 4 categories. I won't go into that quite yet. And Title V as part of the rural education funding stream, which we weren't sure we were getting, but we did. Yay! And and it's actually the most flexible use of funds. Basically, if you can use it for Title I through IV, then you can use it for Title V. They just have different rules, and it's specific to our region, which is why we're funded that way. So I'm going to screen share just briefly. If you can't see it, I will just give you the highlights. Google changed a little, so it takes me just a minute. Funding. I will be sending out a letter to families. It's always posted online. It will be later this week. It's called our public comment letter. I integrate how we use our title funds in all these ways. I communicate with all of the Title I folks who are, that we use funding for them. And I make sure they're aware of how we're using our funding, and ask for input in certain areas where it's allowable. Then I meet with every building team, which is teachers, administrators, interventionists, family, and we talk about how funding was used, what were our school goals, what was the data that supported those goals, what were the outcomes that resulted in that data, how did we do towards our goals, and what were our action steps, and then what will we be doing different, what should we be doing differently in the year to come. And then I also share this public comment sheet that I'll show you in a minute, just making sure people understand what are these funds, where are they going? It's a lot of money, where is it going, and why is it being used? And not only do I post it, but I actually email families and ask for, if they have questions or feedback. And then I collate all that before any application is made to the state, and try to adjust where I see fit, to make sure that we're truly meeting the needs of our students and our community. So what I can say is that this is a fun little chart, but generally we get an allocation in 4 funds. We typically move our funds out of Title IV, for a couple of reasons. First, we elevate the funds in Title V because that allows us to pay for a math interventionist at one of our schools. It's a school that does not qualify for Title I services because their free and reduced lunch rate is no longer at 40% or higher. And so we need to be creative about how we fund positions to ensure that every school in our elementary part of our district has those intervention positions, because those are the people that support the classroom teacher, and then work one-on-one or in small groups with students in an intensive way when students are showing signs that they're struggling to learn certain concepts or skills beyond the supports that were offered already in the classroom. And so we do fund our middle school and high school positions at the intervention level locally. And we fund one of our Title I literacy people. One of our literacy interventionist people locally at Helen Thompson. We use Title V for our math interventionist. Then we move the rest of Title IV over to Title I to beef up our Title I budget. You can move money into Title I, but not out of Title I. And then we look at our Title II money, and we also pull a little bit from there to supplement our Title I budget, because that's where most of our services are provided. So it's really important that that's a healthy budget. In Title II, we then allocate most of the funds to support a class size reduction position. And you've heard a lot about that this year because of COVID and the federal relief funds. We've really tried to redirect as many dollars as possible to reduce our class sizes for the next couple of years to ensure that we can adequately support both social distancing and learner readiness, so that these students are getting the most intensive support from our teachers who are certified and know their content well. And so we've always historically tried to look and see where could we reduce the class size in our district, in our district, to enhance learning objectives based on our pattern of academic achievement. So we usually put that person in grade 3 or 5 because our pattern of academic achievement states that that's where our learners struggle the most. We have this kind of ongoing history of making great gains up through 2nd grade, being super challenged in 3rd grade. It's a big transition year for students. Gaining in 4th grade, and then just before middle school, dipping again. And we're trying to disrupt that cycle. So we're doing that by reducing class sizes. We're doing it by changing the curriculum and installing instructional programming and installing instructional coaches. We're doing a lot of different things so that over time, we won't have that pattern any longer. So that's why we leverage funds from Title II for class size reduction. And then any funds that are not yet allocated in Title II, we then use to support professional learning or leadership development. And this year we are requesting that we do this, and there's a slight potential change because I still have one more comprehensive assessment meeting to have in another school tomorrow, and that could always influence our outcome. But we're having a leadership academy this summer with our instructional coaches, our principals, and our assistant principals at the K-8 level. Given all of the new curriculum instructional programs that are being put into place, we want to make sure they truly understand the depth of these programs, the impact of the curriculum, the scope and sequence, the observational look-fors, the way that ties into our evaluation system, the kind of calibration of expectations, the adjusted schedules we're having in place to enable all this to take shape. And best practices, a deep dive into best practices. We're going to achieve all of that. And so some funds are set aside for that work. And then some funds are set aside for grades 6 through 12 research agenda. We want to really refine our practices in the area of research, student research, and what that looks like in a graduated way from 6th grade through 12th grade, and what kind of resources are developmentally appropriate and rigorous. And we've been doing some of this work at the high school, and we want to do a cross curricular deep dive with science, social studies, and English at the high school and at the middle school, so that when students so there's shared language and shared expectations as much as possible across the content areas, so that students can really start to internalize and develop that conceptual framework that they need for research and become really skilled at it over time. And then Title I, we move our funds, basically that is all salaries and benefits. Plus there's a percentage we have to set aside extra when you use federal funds on salaries and benefits. That go to that, and a small portion for family engagement. And that really just makes sure our families are partners in our system with our Title I students, and that allows us to have some interaction and engagement and resources to support learning at home and in school. So struggling learners might accelerate their learning in a really supportive, multidimensional way. Whew. So the only thing that's different in this year's allocations, thankfully, thanks to the state for setting the parameters that they set, our district did not have a negative impact of all the changes from COVID in our title funds. Title V came in like $400 higher, I think. Some $422 higher, I think. Otherwise, the plan is, besides that Title II professional learning plan, the plan is very similar to years past because most everything goes towards salaries and benefits in a targeted way. Does anyone have questions on that really lengthy presentation of what dollars do we have access to?
Not me.
I will say, this is my worry. Over the years, I'm not the only district finding this, but many districts are finding that our families are not completing the free and reduced lunch applications. That, while it might not feel hugely problematic to the family, it's very problematic to the district, because those applications are actually tied to all of this title funding. And I know we've talked, Nancy's been on the committee for a while, so we've talked about this before a lot. And we understand all the reasons why they don't get filled out. And we've tried to provide as many supports as possible to enable successful completion of those applications. If we go below 40% for 3 years straight in a building, they no longer qualify for Title I. So that's where Helen Thompson is at. So they need to either be locally funded or creatively funded, like we did with Title V.
So you just said something very key.
Yep.
Locally funded.
Mm-hmm.
That means that's the municipal budget's impacted by that.
That's true. The taxpayer dollars end up having to, because we're required to have these intervention systems in place. And it's really hard. You really can't even have the system in place without people running the system.
Right. So
It's-
that's where we could possibly lean on the select people and council members to, champion that particular cause for us as a district. Put it out their meetings. Um, maybe there are a number of mailers that go out from the city to taxpayers throughout the year, including their tax bill, right? Um, might be something that have this municipal side include just as some help, giving us a little bit of help. We can only do so much. A lot of folks, they pay a lot of attention to the municipal side and not necessarily to the school district side.
Well, and if I truly felt like our free and reduced lunch rate was an accurate depiction of our communities, it would be fine. Like we would understand and make that adjustment.
Right.
But I'm not sure the ongoing lowering rate in all of our communities is reflective of
I think I would agree.
our communities. And so that's where it's concerning, because we want to provide as many services as possible at the school level, and to do that efficiently without burdening the local taxpayers. It's that, that connection between that completed paperwork and these dollars matters. We have some plans in place for the fall, trying to send out some of the forms outside of the regular school packet that goes home with a million forms that everyone's overwhelmed by, so that it might have a greater completion rate, connecting some of those to accessing our technology. We're checking on that right now. Other districts do it, but because if you don't qualify, there's a little chart, and if you don't qualify, you can just sign "I don't qualify" and sign your name, and you don't have to disclose any other information.
Right.
So then we're not putting people in positions where they have to share stuff, even though only the director of food services sees any of the forms. No one else in the entire district sees it. She's the most confidential person ever, and follows all the rules. And so all I see ever is our percentage.
Yeah.
And Pittston Randolph is actually getting awfully close to that below 40% mark. So that's making me a little bit nervous.
Maybe we could tie this. This probably sounds stupid, but maybe the trying to get the forms filled out, completed, and sent back. Maybe we could tie that somehow to some type of one of the courses that each student is involved in, and maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
And I hate to use the word bribe, but bribe them with a grade.
The
I don't
challenge
know.
is because it's so confidential, we
I
have
know.
to be really careful with what goes with students,
Yeah.
what's shared, what's handed back and forth between people. We try to keep everything in envelopes, and but I understand the sentiment behind it, and we're certainly going to try some different strategies. We have tried some incentive-based strategies in the past, and we find it does not change our rate. So we are probably not going to go the incentive route, but we are going to try a few different strategies. The one I keep trying to advocate for that we don't have is, like, I really wish the federal government would just make a really easy app.
Right.
You can apply online, which is super, but it's still the extensive application online. And so to read it, it's hard to do it on your phone. It's because of the way the app is, the online package is designed. It's much easier to have to log into a computer and do it. But the reality is many of our families are connected to their phones, not always to other devices. And so I keep trying that maybe someone will hear us. Enough of us will be collective in it, that there's a will and a way and enough security features to have a simplified app that you just answer one question at a time as you go through and submit, and it's in a secure way. That would be my dream.
It's too bad that the state couldn't. It's too bad the state couldn't approach us from a different perspective.
Well,
they have the data.
Federal government. That's the challenge.
Yeah.
And you have to use like a paper hard copy form or that online. Like you couldn't take it and morph it into, like you're saying, a simplified survey for our district.
It doesn't, because of the data families share about their salaries and such, I don't think we're allowed to. That's what I've been trying to get a real answer around because of the security features. Like, I'm not sure we're equipped with that. We have a lot of security features on our student data, but to create something like a web-based app, I'm not sure it would pass muster. Whereas if there was like a broader entity that had all that backing, it would, I have a feeling it would be stronger. I'm still going to pursue it. I'm still going to keep asking around and see what we can find out. But right, one district I know was able to tighten the form enough that it fit on one page, and then they highlighted it in certain colors for certain things and found that it, while the application didn't actually change, it felt more accessible. Like it felt doable. And they got a higher return rate. So, we'll try that too.
Yeah.
But
I
yeah,
have to say, and I think I've said this before, but I'm surprised actually that it's not discrimination. Honestly, because back when my kids were growing up, we were really poor. I'm gonna, but my pride didn't allow me to fill out the form. But my kids were all high honors, all very academically inclined. So to base funding saying that poverty is the reason why people are harder to educate is very, it's discrimination. I have a really hard time with it.
I'm right there with you, Nancy.
Yep.
Singing my
I would
song.
agree.
Yeah, it is a struggle, and it probably would be better if there's a different way we could connect the dots to clarify really that. I know in Title V, they sort of tried that actually. They tried to use census data to identify rural communities. And the result would have been that we would have no money. And while the city center probably wouldn't qualify, our other communities would qualify, would have qualified, but I'm not sure our census data is strong enough to represent that. And that's a little bit of a learning curve for me. So I've got to, if it comes to that, I need to learn more to make sure I truly understand it. But yeah. So, I mean, knowing where we're spending our dollars, is there any concern about that? I mean, it's mostly on staffing to support an intervention model, or to target a class size reduction, as you heard. In our case, we try to do that in grades 3 or 5, and then look at the student and projected enrollment and determine which building that's most suitable for based on the projected enrollment. So there is a process to it. And then professional learning is, I try to balance that against, what's our local, what are our goals, and then how can we meet them through this federal allocation, following their rules that still match with our goals.
Makes sense to me.
Try to be as transparent as possible.
I have no concerns.
Okay. Well, then what I will do is make sure the public comment letter goes out to our community, our families. So in case they have any input, I'll continue following up with my building level meetings that I'm having, or community building level meetings. It's called a CNA meeting. And then I'll eventually be ready to apply any day now.
Excellent.
Great. And those are the two big items on my agenda for today, our agenda.
Okay.
Great. Well, folks,
When's our next meeting going to be?
that is a great question. That's why it's not on the agenda.
September?
So if we,
Right.
So Matt, I think we're going to have to follow up, because if we met in August, it would be August 10th, which seems really early. And if we met in September, it would be September 14th, which feels a little late. But I think I will defer to you to check in with Becky Fless our board chair, and help
Okay.
decide if we're going to launch in August or launch in September. Does that
Okay.
seem reasonable?
Mhm.
Yep. I'll get with her at some point over the next couple of weeks and chat about it. I'm gonna see her at graduation anyway, and
Great.
probably see her before that, so or sometime after that. So
Super. So I'll put that in our minutes, just saying under adjournment, I'll say that we'll either meet the second week of August or the second week of September, pending the chair and the board chair determining the launch for the year. Great. Well,
okay.
that concludes our meeting for today, and it's 5:13, so we got out early on this beautiful day.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks,
You're
Matt.
awesome.
Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you, Greg,
Thanks.
for
Thank you.
streaming this for us.